It's time. It's time again. We have completed 2016, and it is time for the first regular podcast for our new year, new calendar year. This is ATACS, episode 5, Adults Talk About Cool Stuff. I'm your host, Paul from Atlanta, and joining me at our virtual roundtable, we have Flex from Raleigh. How's it going, Flex?
It's the start of the year, and I'm already tired.
That's a problem. We've also got Will from Greenville. What's up, Will?
2016's boss fight was really difficult.
Would you say that we won or lost the boss fight?
I think we lost.
And last but not least, we have Ryan from New York City. Hello, Ryan.
Happy 2017. A less contentious podcast.
A less contentious podcast. Hopefully, a less contentious year. We're just gonna.
Doom's the best, everyone.
We're not going to talk about that. We're just going to sail right on in to nice, some slow jazz, some cooler times. Let's talk about something relaxing. Like, let's talk about video games. I have an announcement for everyone. I have officially completed Witcher 3.
Woohoo!
Whoa.
Yeah.
This is a momentous occasion.
It certainly is. I started critical pathing it right after I bought the version on Steam that came with all the DLC on the winter sale. So I just sat down and just sort of ran through a lot of that. And I finished that actually the day before yesterday. Sat down, got through it. Actually did not get the worst possible ending in the game, even though I was not using a walkthrough at all. And that's a real good video game.
Yeah, it is.
I was about to ask because with open world games, critical pathing it, there's a fine tightrope to walk between doing a bazillion hours of side quests and doing no side quests.
Yeah, and I kind of feel like for me, what ended up happening was, number one, I had the game set to very easy. So once you reach a certain point in that game, you just have kind of out-leveled everything. So I kind of reached that point, and then I really didn't need to go off and do any side quests. I'm pretty sure I didn't even manage my inventory for the last 10 or so hours on the game, because I just stopped looting, basically. And got through all of that. And I could tell that when I got done with the game, I probably still had about maybe 15 or 20 hours of patience left with it. So whenever I go back and replay it on PC, which will probably be somewhere late this year, I probably will invest significantly more time in it the second time around. I wasn't tired of it. I wasn't tired of the gameplay, and that's a real good game, and I'm definitely going to go back to it. So anyone that hasn't played Witcher 3, go play Witcher 3.
Yeah, it's good. And the side quests in that game I think are pretty manageable because I did a lot of them because I think a lot of the side quests in that game are way better than a lot of side quests in other open world games. I would actually go so far as to say that the quests in that game are one of its strengths. And I played on one difficulty above the normal, and I did a fair chunk of side quests, and then when I kind of got tired of doing them, I backed off, and it never became a problem with the main quest. So I feel like that game you can kind of just do however many you want, and it doesn't really punish you for doing more or less. Like, you kind of, with your skills and leveling in that game, like, you kind of hit a point where you have what you need, and like no more past that's really going to help you that much.
Right.
And you're probably going to hit that point, or at least close to it, just by doing the main quest. So it's not really required to do many side quests. But at the same time, I think some of the best quests in that game are side quests. So you kind of, or at least for my part, I wanted to do the side quests because they were really good. There definitely are, like, I would say up front, there are like little question marks or whatever on the world map. Those kind of side quests are absolutely not worth doing. But like all the side quests that like have a name for the quest or are monster hunts, like those are all pretty good.
Yeah. So I finished up that, and also Steph and I jumped on the Castle Crashers train only about 9 years later than the game came out. Picked that up at the Steam Winter Sale. It was like $1.50. So we picked that up, and I would guess we're probably a little over halfway through with that game, maybe around 3/4. That's just a really fun beat 'em up. I missed it back when it first came out for 360. Didn't really have any intention of picking it up, but then it was like really cheap and really good reviews. So it's like, well, let's give it a shot. So we're having a lot of fun with that one.
Yeah, it's been a minute, I think, for probably most of us, but it does. I mean, we still actually reference it every time that there's a moment in a game where you have to button mash really, really fast to get something accomplished.
Yeah.
And someone fails, we tell them that they should go practice by playing All You Can Quaff. I don't know if you've seen All You Can Quaff. It's like an eating game where you just button mash as hard as you can to eat things. But it's so it still has some cultural relevance, clearly.
Clearly.
So are you and Steffi critical pathing Castle Crashers? Because that's a game that can reward some grinding, if I remember correctly.
I mean, pretty much what we've been doing is like, you know, we're just sort of following the linear path, or I mean, yeah, branches, but you know, like we're just kind of going and doing that, and then whenever we end up getting to a spot where it's like, man, these guys hurt a lot, then we'll just sort of go back and we'll go through one of the earlier stages and just like we do grinding that way, but we're not grinding unless we hit a wall. And we've hit a couple of those, but it's still fun to go back and play some of the earlier stages.
Yeah, and I will say that the newest game by that developer, Pit People, just entered early access this week on Steam, and it's a turn-based co-op game.
Huh.
Kind of it's on a grid, so it's like a turn-based strategy type thing, but it looks pretty interesting. I've got my eye on it.
All right, cool. Yeah. So Flex, what's been taking up your time here recently?
So I actually haven't touched a video game since last Tuesday, so almost a week, but last weekend I went deep down a Hitman rabbit hole and got really into a world of assassination that I could not have anticipated. That game's really good, y'all.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard.
Yeah.
I think I watched you live stream a little bit of it, which was pretty entertaining.
Yeah. I think you might have seen a special golf ball of sorts.
Yeah, the golf ball was pretty magical, and the guy went flying through the air.
Yeah, the thing that game does so well is just encourage you to more or less break the rules of the game. Like, so often you think of like stealth games or whatever, like really like kind of forcing you to adhere to very strict rules and patterns and those kind of things. It's like, okay, you wait for the guards to walk this way, get your opportunity, sneak through, and so forth. And like, you know, a lot of people pejoratively say trial and error and all that stuff. But like the thing this game does, and I don't even know if I'd call it a stealth game anymore, because like it gives you a big open like sandbox area, and it gives you one goal you have to do: kill this person. And like it really encourages you in some really smart ways to just like go out of like what you would think would be like the normal ways to go. Like normally you think like, oh, you know, sneak around, get in the right costume, like poison their drink, or like do something really crafty like that, and you still can do that stuff, but then it'll encourage you to do things like, no, go find the explosive golf ball and like put it in his pile of golf balls and wait for him to try and hit it and it'll blow up. Or like there was some in one level, like there's some training thing going on, and you're like you like get a costume for like some mercenary soldier and like infiltrate their group, and they're going over like this regimen for like how they're gonna stop a car and like take out the people in it, and then there's like this mechanical battering ram, and you could like sabotage it to make it malfunction and hit your target like when they're not expecting it, and just like all of these, or like drop light structures or like chandeliers on people, just like all sorts of ridiculous things. And they'll incentivize you for doing it in weird costumes too. So like the way they incentivize all this stuff is like there's a bunch of challenges for all of the maps. So like one of the challenges will straight up be like blow up this guy with an explosive golf ball. I mean, the fact that there's even an explosive golf ball in the map at all is already a ridiculous thing. Like it's just you just find it somewhere on the map. And like that's really like the great tone that game takes is like the whole thing from start to finish just feels like this giant toy box of like stuff to play around with. Like it really like from the ground up is just built to be this thing where you poke and prod and tinker like at every angle and just see what you can come up with.
The playroom of death.
Yeah, it's I mean the tagline is World of Assassination, and they have built out that world in all sorts of fun ways. It's really fun to just mess with. There's a really funny NPC line I encountered. And this is the other thing is like the NPCs in the game are like all really goofy and like kind of feed into just this absurd tone. But it's just walking around at one point and you hear this NPC say, "Someone's doing stuff they shouldn't." It's like, what? Why would they say that? But like it kind of goes in a way to like define the whole game is like the game kind of encourages you to just do things that you feel like you shouldn't, but it encourages you to go break all the rules, which I thought was a really fun take on that style of game. It's a really cool game.
All right. Yeah, I've watched a few things from that, and it seems like one of those. It really rewards creativity.
It really does, yeah.
Which is always nice to find, especially in a lot of the games today is like objective marker,
Yeah. And it's
so
not.
That's.
Yeah, and it rewards creativity, and it also gives you clear goals, and I think it does a really. Like, I feel like sometimes, like, kind of on the extremes, you have some games, that are just constant waypoints and telling you exactly where to go. And then on the other extreme, you'll have games that maybe allow for too much creativity in the sense that you don't feel like you have a real goal to work towards. It's just it really is just a sandbox with nothing really to work towards. And I think this game does a really smart balance of giving you very clear goals and very clear objectives. And if you want to, like, maximize each level, you can try and complete all the challenges, giving you further like clear goals to work for. But within all of those goals, you can be very creative in how you reach them. So I think this game does a really smart balance of like walking the line between the two extremes and giving you structured challenges and goals while also letting you being very creative every step of the way. Because like I always felt like I always had a clear goal in mind, but along the way I was constantly adapting and kind of being creative in coming up with how I got to that goal, and that was a really fun like way to play that game, and I think they pulled it off really well.
Yeah. Anything else?
I also, since we haven't done this since the holidays, for a normal episode, during holiday travels, I played some Pocket Card Jockey.
I've never heard of that before.
Card Jockey.
Pocket Card Jockey.
What console or handheld did you play that?
That is on the 3DS. And that is made by, I believe, the Pokemon people, Game Freak. But it is, you could summarize it as horse racing solitaire.
Could you?
You could. So you literally play its version of solitaire while on the bottom screen, while there is a horse race going on the top screen, and how you do in solitaire affects how you're doing in the horse race.
That sounds like something I have no interest in.
If you're like if you're searching through like your deck at the top or whatever, like your horse is slowing down or something.
Yeah, so you like go into these solitaires, like when it gets into a solitaire section, you like kind of have a time limit to get through as many cards as you can, and depending on how much you get through, and then like some of the cards will have various bonus icons on them, and depending on how many cards you get through or what bonus icons you hit, like at the end of the solitaire portion, like that'll affect how your horse will do, and it'll also like give you more, I forget what it's called, but it's basically some kind of boost meter that you can expend to make your horse go faster, and like kind of the other stuff you end up doing between the solitaire segments. It's a really silly game. It also has a surprise, like none of it's hard, but like there are a surprising number of mechanics in this game. Like you would think solitaire is a simple thing and horse racing is a simple concept, but they add in a lot of weird like ways that you have to like manage your horse and your career and like balance your horse's stamina and energy and like all of that stuff, and like they really went whole hog with the idea of horse racing solitaire in a way that's kind of charming. And being by the, I'm pretty sure it's Game Freak, but they have some, their own kind of brand of charm, I guess, to it. It's I'm not gonna sit here and say it's an amazing game, but it's an amusing thing to play, like, when you have a few minutes here and there.
Did that one off and on for a while too, right?
I'm sorry?
Yeah, you started that one like a good while ago.
Yeah, I
too,
started
didn't
it sometime over the holidays. I don't remember exactly when. We haven't had a normal episode of this for a while.
I had one question,
Uh-huh.
and I'm sorry it takes me a minute to process, but and I'm going backwards with the Hitman. One of the things that you and I have spoken about pretty extensively is I guess the existence or absence of your environmental information, like your stealth sort of,
Yeah.
I guess, like what you call, awareness levels. What way are they looking? How much noise am I making?
Yeah, your Batman vision.
Yeah. So how does I guess how much of that does Hitman include? How much of that? I guess what was your take
Yeah.
on the way stealth was done? Was it done in a way where you felt like you had enough information? Did it matter?
I did. Yeah, I felt like it definitely did. I still think for my money, Mark of the Ninja does that better than any game. And it's also possibly easier to do that in a 2D game.
Right.
But for 3D stealth games, this Hitman is the best game I've played at giving you feedback, because you do have basically like a Batman vision type thing. If you hold one of the right bumper and the world goes gray, and it'll highlight objects you can interact with. It'll highlight your targets, the people you're supposed to kill. They're red. Objects you can interact with are orange. And it puts dots. So when you get in costumes, some people will recognize you in the costume and some people won't. So like it kind of gets you access past some people and not others. And anyone who would recognize you and would cause an alert state, they have a white dot above their head. And they have that white dot above their head whether you're in like the special vision or not. You just always see that white dot. And that white dot's actually very easy to see. So you always know who to stay away from. If you start getting too close to someone who would recognize you, it starts like building up a like little meter that's like, oh, hey, they're noticing you. And that meter is actually very generous. So like if you start seeing that meter fill up, like you have a few seconds to get away. So you can pretty easily back off. Like I never had a spot where someone started seeing me and I wasn't just like barreling right towards them, where I couldn't immediately back away and be okay. And oftentimes, even if they see you, like if you hide quickly, like they'll forget about it.
Okay.
Must have been the shadow. So it's pretty forgiving on that stuff. But then by just their quote unquote detective vision or whatever you want to call it, like that thing's really nice. And the mini map also will identify. The mini map's very handy because it's showing dots for people and it fills in the dots of people that can would identify you. So you can like even use that to like just have a very quick glance at like even behind you where you may not be looking with your camera, like where people are that will recognize you. And you can see that stuff both on the mini map and with the detective vision. You can see all of that stuff through walls as well. So it's actually not a very reflex intensive game. Like most of the time I played, I was just kind of walking around, like looking at the mini map and using my detective vision and kind of planning routes and, well, not really planning routes, but like kind of figuring out my routes as I slowly walked around, and like pretty much never got snuck up on by anyone that I didn't know was coming. Like every now and then I'd be like, oh, there's a narrow, I see like on the spot there's a narrow window here and I'm going to dash through it, and like maybe they'll start seeing me, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to get through. Yeah, and
Well,
then
that's
there are
good
other
though. I
things.
mean, you don't want to have, you don't want to fail because you didn't have enough info.
Yeah,
and
I
just,
never felt like I didn't have enough info.
right.
There were a few things that caught me the first time I did it, and then never caught me again because then I learned how it worked. So maybe those things could have
Oh,
been a little more clearly explained. But stuff like,
gotcha.
if you assault someone from the back, it'll be like a silent takedown. But if you assault them from the front because they see you attacking them, then they offer a little resistance, and that actually makes close combat noise.
Hmm.
And someone in a neighboring room could hear that.
Right.
So like the first time I did that, and then someone heard it, I was like, oh, okay. If I'm assaulting someone from the front, it's going to make noise. And then once I knew that, I knew to avoid that, or I knew that I would have to deal with the
Give it a wide
consequences.
berth. Right.
Yeah. So
Okay.
it's pretty good about that stuff. The other thing, at
Hmm.
least for me, is like load times were real. You can save anywhere, and load times were really quick.
Hmm.
Um, so if I ever wasn't sure how something would work, I would often just save and try it just to figure it out.
Okay.
And that wasn't that bad. But I think for the most part, it actually does a really good job.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And then I had one quick question for Paul, and this may not be particularly like, because I know you mentioned that you kind of blitzkrieged
Yeah.
your Witcher 3, but one of the things that I've heard about the game that has made me more excited to try it than a lot of things is this idea that the types of potions and like the little tonics and things that you get, like say for instance, you have a fire resistance tonic or a special like salve that you can put on, salve might be the wrong word, but oil or something that you can put on your blade that would make you effective versus certain enemies
Yeah.
that, I know that when we all end Skyrim, you have this entire inventory full of like fire resistance and cold resistance potions that you were sort of saving for a rainy day that never came. But I've
Right.
heard that the Witcher does a very good job at sort of not necessarily forcing your hand, but making it to where those types of things, like applying your blade with a certain type of oil or preparing a fight for a certain way, really like pays off in a way that it might not in other types of games or other games, period. Is
Yeah.
that something that you found?
Yeah. I mean, yes and no. So the best way to play that game is on one of the higher difficulties because it makes everything feel so much more weighty. When I first started playing the game, I was on one difficulty over normal, the same way that Flex was. Um, and yeah, you had to spend time like going into your bestiary, reading about this thing that you're
Yeah.
supposed to kill, and then it's like, okay, well, I'm gonna go brew this particular oil. Okay, well first I need to go find this, the herbs that I need to make that, and it's like you're preparing for a hunt, like a legitimate hunt, and it has a
A wild hunt?
no, not a wild hunt.
Okay.
Those guys are scary, but
Okay.
but yeah, so like whenever you're given a monster contract where it's like, hey, there's this wyvern that's killing all of our sheep, you're like, all right, what do I need to do for the wyvern? And then you like look, okay, well I need to go brew this potion and I need to find. See, this is a beast, so do I know? Okay, I don't have the recipe for this oil yet. But I should probably go and buy that somewhere. And then you just sort of like poke around, and you'll spend more time preparing for the fight than the fight will actually take. And
Right.
whenever you're playing on the higher difficulties and you're going through and doing all this stuff, required is a strong word, but that's a game that really does focus a lot around giving you a whole bunch of tools,
Yeah.
and yes, you do have to use them. It's
Yeah.
not like like a Skyrim or an
Right.
Oblivion where it's like, hey, I have 77 potions in my inventory. I am never going to use one of them.
Yeah. They're
Right.
very
So
they're very different games in that regard. Like I think you absolutely could get through that game even on higher difficulties without using those potions. So yeah, Paul was right that I don't think they're required, but they do make a big difference. And I think it plays really into the fact that like Geralt is a monster hunter by trade, and he is more than just being like he is a physically strong dude, but that's not really what he relies on. He relies on his smarts and his knowledge of these monsters, and
Right.
they really
Right.
play into that. A lot of times when you do the monster hunts, you'll actually start out doing a lot of like tracking footprints and like investigating like a scene where an attack happened. And that stuff will
Gotcha.
also help fill out your bestiary. And yeah, like
Oh,
Paul
okay.
said, like it does put a lot of emphasis and like on making sure you're using the right potions and stuff. So they really play into the fact that like Geralt has been doing this for a while, and like he knows his monsters, and he knows that that's the best, safest way to take them out, and that they aren't to be taken lightly.
Yeah, and so he's a little like Batman in that regard. You know, it's like fantasy Batman. You know, you're spending a lot of time doing a lot of investigation, and the stuff that Geralt learns in game as it's translated into the bestiary on higher difficulties, you also need to know those things. So that's why that you would get in there, and the game does some smart stuff with inventory management, to make all that a little less like, shocking. Yeah. So they actually make it relatively easy for you to visit merchants and just buy the ingredients that you may not have for things. So it's something that you're not really hobbled by the inventory system the same way that you are in some of the other games. And I think that that's something that they patched after the game came out. I think it was not so great when the game first came out, but they've been making steady improvements to that UI and to the inventory system over time. So none of it really feels like it's like, oh, well, let me go brew this potion because I think I put half the ingredients back in my stash. No, it's nothing like that. All of the ingredients are weightless. They're always accessible.
Okay. Cool.
So it's pretty neat.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're fine. Actually, you're next up. So what you been playing?
Well, did Fowler have anything else he wanted to add there to what he was playing?
The only other game I've been playing is the game Ryan's been playing, so I'll let him take that one.
Okay. All right. So it has been a long time since I really played many single-player games, and so I sort of broke a hiatus back into the single-player world. And so since we actually last had one of these, I've played a tremendous number of games. So I guess I don't know how we want to go about it. I could kind of list things, and people could ask things, or what do you guys think?
One bite at a time. How do you eat the elephant?
Yeah. So, well, let me just I'll kind of list some of them, or what do you want to do, Fowler?
Oh, I was just gonna say maybe pick your yeah. Maybe start with the one or two you'd most like to talk about, and then we'll just see where that goes.
Okay. Let's see. I would say probably the most interesting game I've played. One of them is probably Soma. I thought Soma was very, very good. Also had an interesting time with Pony Island. So I would say maybe those are the two, if I had to pick two that I thought were most interesting.
Soma is that in the same vein as it's like a darker version of the Talos Principle, or what is?
Okay, so Soma is the next game by the developers Frictional of Amnesia. And so it has the same gameplay kind of quirks about it where, you sort of the weird thing about all those games is everything that you do in the game, you have to kind of move your mouse to kind of in the actual, so if you pull a lever, you don't just click the lever. You always grab the lever and then you move your mouse down to pull it. Or if you open a cabinet, you have to swing your mouse out like you're opening a cabinet or turning a lever. And so that's one of the weird quirks that they do. Also, there typically is no violence in the game in terms of, there's plenty of violence that you witness and maybe come upon, but you don't have any weapons typically. You're kind of a defenseless guy. So a lot of the time, if there is a foe, you're kind of hiding or dodging or something, or running, something like that. But in short, it kind of explores and basically this idea of people's consciousnesses being stored kind of in machines. And so you kind of are walking around kind of slowly discovering this sort of world where this has sort of taken place, and there are ways that this could go wrong more than you could possibly. It seems like, Frictional spent about as much time as anyone could thinking about how this idea could go wrong, But of course, it's sort of a compelling idea in the sort of technological present and future, the idea of somehow storing a consciousness or taking a brain scan or something like that. And I don't know if anyone. It's a weird one because I'm not quite sure exactly what you can reveal, because so much of what's interesting is sort of these story beats that really kind of slowly kind of reveal what's kind of happening. But I will say, just in short, because this isn't, I don't think, well, this actually may be too big of a reveal, but either way, so spoilers ahead. But basically, your character gets a brain scan back in sort of modern times, and then that brain scan becomes sort of almost like a template. So it's almost like so people have continued getting brain scans years and years on in the future, but for you, it almost feels like your brain just turned off in 2000 and then turned back on in 2050, because your consciousness gets uploaded to this machine and you start kind of walking around and seeing what's up. And so in some ways, that's kind of interesting. It reminds me a little bit of like HeLa cells. I don't know if you guys have heard of like Henrietta Lacks. She was a woman who was very famous for actually having these immortal cells. And so people have used this one woman's or copies of this one woman's cells to do like tons and tons of science and biology experiments. And so it's almost like if you imagine, instead of, if we're not talking about cells, we're talking about basically a brain scan or a certain consciousness. It's almost like your character, his consciousness has become a template that's used like
Right.
over and over again, which is sort of interesting to imagine how many variants of yourself there might have been, and what befell all of these different variants. So it's really an interesting thing.
Yeah.
So
Maybe that's
Go ahead,
go
Ryan.
ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say maybe that's where I had heard some like light parallels between the Talos principle and Soma, in that although Soma is an acronym actually used within the Talos principle, it also not necessarily like human consciousness, but it plays around with the idea of like sentience and consciousness in like a technological context.
Yeah, I think it's like a Greek word meaning body or life or something like that. I don't know. Someone would have to look it up.
Yeah.
But
You're right.
it's a compelling game. I think it's got a really interesting story to tell, and I think that it's one of these games that, even though in some ways you may consider it kind of a walking simulator, the fact that you are that character, and that you are kind of unfolding these things, I feel like it probably wouldn't work quite as well as a film. There are times that it could be made more engaging, but I do think it benefits from being in the certain medium it is, even though its primary sort of drawing force is its story rather than particularly its gameplay.
Yeah, I mean,
So it's a flawed monster, I guess.
Yeah, that was one thing I was going to ask. I mean, it sounds like you really liked, you did really like the narrative in there, and everything I'd heard about it was similar. I've heard people really like the narrative, and I would like to check it out at some point as well. But you did feel like it was a fun thing to play through as well, or at least worthwhile to play through.
Oh yeah. I think the another thing that's kind of interesting is, one of the things that I think is actually brilliant about the game is there are these surveys that happen in the game. And so you walk up to these computer terminals, and the surveys are typically like 7 questions long. And they might ask you things like, do you like your new body? Do you see your life as a continuation of your old life, or as a completely new thing, et cetera, et cetera. And you take these quizzes at certain parts of the game, and it almost makes it evident how your thinking changes on what's happening, because sort of as you live this experience, your sort of mind changes on what is acceptable and what is human, and what is worth preserving, and so it's interesting to me that those surveys almost mark a point where you begin to feel differently, as well, and make it evident in a way. But that was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds cool.
Yeah, and if anyone has any other questions on Soma, I love talking about it. Like I said, in terms of traditional gaming media, it would probably only merit like an 8 or an 8.5. And the reason I say that is there are some moments where you're walking along the bottom of the ocean, and they always feel a little bit too long. The game's
Right.
about 8 hours long or so. So there are some segments in there that really kind of drag, but to me, I guess the story beats kind of kept me moving.
Yeah.
But not to say that it's perfect by any stretch of the imagination.
Cool.
The other game, and I love these experiences that really kind of explore, you know, in some ways what it's like to play a game and what we're looking for from a game and how we see ourselves in a game. And one of the things that's really interesting, if you actually kind of generalize what Soma is saying, is this idea that, like, you know, if you're taking a quiz that says, you know, do things feel right? You know, do you feel like this is a continuation of your life? Do you feel like your consciousness has been put here? In some ways, you can see it as a parallel to taking any protagonist in any game, you know, and whether or not that game succeeds at making you feel like you have agency in that world,
Right.
or whether or not, you know, for instance, whether or not whether or not you even feel like the input is one to one, you know, and so it's interesting to think about Soma, the idea of transferring a consciousness, just almost like playing any game. You know, in a way, we all put our consciousness in another character when we play a game. And whether or not the game is well done sometimes, you know, is determined by how well that transition goes. Whether or not we feel like we are truly being represented by our character, whether our character, you know, the old term ludonarrative dissonance, whether we feel like our character does things that we wouldn't do, or whatever, you know. So I think there's a lot of interesting ways to read it.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
when I play Hitman, I feel like Helmut Kruger all the time.
Agent 41. Yeah, or 47, my fault. Gosh, such a bad
Come on,
Hitman
Will.
fan. But yeah, so the other game, and it's also kind of got similar themes in a way, is Pony Island. Okay, and the things that I thought were interesting about Pony Island. Okay, so ostensibly, Pony Island is about a guy who walks into an arcade. He sees a machine called Pony Island. He starts playing and finds that he cannot stop because he has been trapped. So he's trapped in this sort of crappy pony jumping game where you have a pony that runs along and you jump over gates, and that's basically the whole game. But you find ways to sort of hack the game, and you look for these sort of vulnerabilities in terms of how terrible it's been coded, to where you can actually kind of change what's happening. Now, the thing that I think is so interesting is that a lot of the things in the game that really slow you down, a lot of like the annoying things like having to grind or having to upgrade, or even like waiting for DLC.
Yeah.
They're parodies of some of the biggest transgressions of modern game designers, you know. And so in some ways, you trying to escape this world is almost like you trying to escape the machinations of some sort of twisted, terrible modern game developer who makes you, you know, wait for DLC that lets you finish the story, or grind for 100 levels to get an upgrade that lets you jump over a hole, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
And basically you're going into the game's files to basically empower yourself to kind of overcome this obstacle. So to me, it's really kind of an interesting,
Yeah.
you know,
It's like
criticism.
encouraging you to like metagame break the game.
Right. But at the game isn't fairly made, though.
Right, yeah,
You know,
exactly.
so-
It's because, the
yeah.
game's, it's encouraging you by virtue of the game itself being unfair and broken.
Right. And so, to me, it's really clever in that way. And I love games that do that. And I think, you know, another game that I think both you and I played, Flex, is The Beginner's
Yeah,
Guide.
that as you were
to
saying all this, that was the exact game I was thinking of.
Yeah, that has a lot to say.
And
about,
also his other game, Stanley Parable, like both of those
Yeah,
games.
Stanley. I didn't play the Beginner's Guide, but the Stanley Parable is hilarious.
Yeah, and so playing with the idea of, you know, who your character is, what he's doing, how he exists in the world.
Yeah.
and how the world can actually accommodate his free will, or if it can, So
yeah, it's all of these are like commentary on like what video games are and can be, or like what the experience of a video game is in different lights, I guess.
Yeah, and I have a soft spot for those types of games. I will say I really like when the games are exploring these types of ideas. So those were, I played a ton of games, but those were the two that I felt like probably captured my imagination probably the most.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
And Pony Island definitely seems like one of those games that that I think I'd probably enjoy just from the standpoint of it's like it's like a smart commentary, but but it's also like a meta game kind of, So yeah, that just seems really neat.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are some, and it's not unfun to play. To me, the puzzles are they're interesting sort of layman logic puzzles. In some ways you're going into the game and changing the programming, but it's very intuitive, like to see kind of where you can change.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily overly complicated, and it's kind of interesting in the way that it does that. And just as a free plug, the overwhelmingly positive Humble Bundle, I think, that is out right now.
Yes.
Pony Island is in the very first tier.
I did see that, and I was considering it, so this might be the push I need.
Yeah, so anybody who wants to check it out, it's a pretty easy. That's a pretty cheap way of grabbing.
Probably
it.
worth $1.
Yeah, I'd say so. But anyway, so that's those are the two I've played recently. Now, otherwise, been playing a lot of the things that are kind of ongoing. I think Ryan and I both have been playing a little bit of Payday 2. I played Flex let me play Mysterium, which I guess we talk about any kind of game. I don't know.
It's a board game.
But it's a board game, and I thought it was absolutely fantastic. And so maybe we'll get some time later to talk about it or in another podcast. But it's worth looking into if you enjoy co-op board game experiences.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Ryan, I see that you've jotted down some odd letters in our agenda here. Could that perchance be a Final Fantasy game that you've been playing recently?
Yeah, we've talked about a couple of open world games in the podcast so far, and the game I've spent the most time on, probably since our last podcast, has been Final Fantasy 15. It's kind of got its hooks in me, and so I have been doing a lot of the side content. I basically was playing through the game kind of in a normal clip, probably about 35-ish hours in, and I had been kind of bouncing between the side quests and the main quests, and I hit chapter 6, and I found that the game was advancing the main quest pretty rapidly. So around chapter 12, I was like, well, I really want to see a few other things before I don't know how far the game goes, but it went from 6 to 12 pretty rapidly. So I kind of stepped back into the open world experience and was poking around it, doing a few things, and one thing has kind of led to another, and now I think I'm closing in on finishing out several side quest threads, and
You're
almost
stuck.
maxed out on my character skills and some things like that. So it's been a good time though. I like I wouldn't say it's a flawless execution by any means, but I do really like what Square Enix is going for. I like the characters, and I hope to see them do games like this maybe more frequently, like with less
What, I mean,
cycles.
One game every 10 years doesn't quite sate your thirst?
Yeah, I mean, Final Fantasy and I have had an on-again, off-again relationship, so don't consider myself a die-hard Final Fantasy fan since a few years after 10, but I am happy to see them actually delivering a game worth playing.
Yeah. Now, just out of curiosity, did you get into any of their other content, the movie or the series?
Yeah. At some point during my playthrough, I did pick up Kingsglaive, and then I also went and watched Brotherhood not that long ago.
Okay.
Which Kingsglaive is a pretty good movie. It probably is worth watching. Play the game. I don't feel like any of the content is necessary, but it does give you a little more context, and that is one thing the game I think hurts for a little bit is that sometimes you don't exactly get what's going on.
Right, and I guess a quick PSA to any of our listeners: Square Enix has come out and said that they're gonna release what amounts to a content patch, where they're going to add in some perspective on the game if you're someone that did not go and look at any of their previous content. So they will be releasing that. I don't know if they have a release date for it yet or not, but I've actually been holding off on playing the game until they're done with that, because I have plenty of other things in my queue, and I'll just wait until they're done patching it before I sit down and play it.
Yeah, as far as I know, there's no date for that.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like, too, if you watch Kingsglaive, you pretty much already know what they're going to put in that patch.
Yeah, and I guess for me, it's just, like, I'm not aching to sit down and play that game. I've got several other things that are on my to-play list, so I would rather just wait and then play the very best version of that game, because I know that I'm only going to play through it once. I don't think it's going to be one of those where I'm going to go through there and have multiple playthroughs or anything. So I just rather wait until it's all done, all patched, everything's finished, and then I'll get into it and play it then.
You're not going to
Makes sense.
new game plus it and max out.
Listen, there was a time in my life when I would play a video game just nonstop for like 4 straight months.
That was called middle school.
It was called middle school, but now I'm an adult, and that doesn't happen anymore. So,
Yep.
so no.
I feel you there. I do have one question for Ryan. So I'm probably on chapter 5 or 6, and I had one like decent chunk where I just kind of went and did a bunch of side quests for a while around chapter 3 or 4. And the side quests I've done have not grabbed me at all. So if I did just want to go critical path the game, does the game kind of support that, or do at some point you really need to do side quests? Like right now I'm over leveled for the main quest, but because I have done some side quests, but if I from here just stuck to the main quest, would that become a problem? Does the game support that?
So it sounds like we're sort of on a similar path, which I think the game kind of does that by design, because up until about chapter 6, you visit areas where you'll run into side quests, and there's kind of a fairly easy bouncing back and forth between main quests and side quests. But starting at chapter 6, the main quest kind of separates itself from side quests, and so we were probably in a similar position. I kind of got my fill of side quests and started back on the main quest, and I think jumped from chapter 6 to chapter 12 maybe. And I mean, it was a little challenging at parts, and I felt like maybe I was running a little thin on some items and such, but I didn't feel like I had to turn back.
Okay.
I did partly because, I wanted to fill out a little bit more, and I also didn't, like I said, because the main quest seems to separate itself from a lot of the game's side content. I was like, oh, well, before I go beat this game, let me circle back. I'm not quite done with this stuff. There are a couple more things I wanted to wrap up. So yeah, if you wanted to critical path it, I think you could just hit chapter 6 and sail on.
Okay.
At least to chapter 12, and I assume probably right through the end of the game. It seemed like it was kind of on track to just push you straight to the end of the game.
I think I heard the game's around 15 chapters or so, but some chapters may be longer than others towards the end. And at some point, I think it kind of, at least temporarily, traps you out of the open world, but I could be wrong on that.
You are not wrong.
Okay. Have you already gone through that part? Or is it coming up?
Yeah.
Okay.
They give you a way to kind of connect back.
Okay. That's all I need to know.
So is it still a turn-based strategy game?
Nope.
I haven't
No.
really. Okay, so is that kind of been out of the Final Fantasy thing for a while now?
Well, actually, I've heard 15 has two forms of combat, but kind of the standard default form is what's called like action mode.
Okay.
Which have you been using?
And I've been using action mode.
Okay. I've been using wait mode.
Okay, yeah, wait mode might play more like a turn-based or real-time turn-based. Action mode is sort of, not exactly sure how to describe it.
I mean,
like
it's
a-
more like an action adventure kind of game than
Yeah.
it is like an RPG battle
Yeah.
system if you're using action mode. Mash buttons, achieve combos, kill things.
You don't even have to mash buttons. You just hold circle. Here's how combat works in this game, Will. You hold circle and you win.
Okay.
Based on some of the fights I've just done, that is not true at all. But yeah, I mean, holding circle will get you a long way, and in most of the easy encounters.
Okay. Well, I just haven't really been following much, so I'm a little behind the loop on the Final Fantasy.
No, it's all right. Yeah, the original Final Fantasies were very turn-based, and they've kind of slowly over time become less and less turn-based. Like there's always been kind of like potentially like a pause and consider options element to them, but they've definitely become more actiony over time.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, and I mean, I would even go so far as to say that the gameplay has gotten to the point to where they just want to tell a story and then show you pretty pictures. So the gameplay's not the most challenging part of the game unless you really want to dig down into those systems. But
Yeah, like this.
but like
15
I
by
don't know.
far, is the most simplified combat in the franchise, I would say.
But it looks real cool.
I haven't played wait mode, but I actually would say that one of the challenges of the action mode is that it takes a while to get used to the combat. So I don't know. I guess if you play wait mode, and that is an option, like your mileage may vary, but
Right.
not to say that it's difficult for most of the game. I mean, there are, like I said, I've just did some side quests where I was in some very difficult encounters, but learning like all the options, like targeting, warp striking, like when to defend, like blocking and parrying, armature, magic, like there are a lot of things going on and like a lot of different controls to remember, and it took me a while to get, I don't feel like I've mastered it, but I feel like I understand how to use most of those tools now.
Gotcha.
Right. Well, Rhonda, have you been playing anything else, or is there anything else with Final Fantasy that you want to bring up?
The other things worth noting are just kind of the ongoing multiplayer games. So when it's an option, when people are around, I've been playing Payday 2 with Will and a couple other friends he mentioned, and I've been playing Titanfall 2.
Okay. All right. Anything you want to bring to the table on those games, or is just pretty self-explanatory kind of stuff?
We should probably go ahead and move into the next section.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, I think we will take a quick break, and then whenever we get back, we are going to talk about the news, because there is news to talk about. So we'll be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back. After the break, we're all refreshed. We have beverages. I got some saltine crackers, and now we're gonna move into news because there's some stuff to talk about. First thing, real quick, AGDQ, Awesome Games Done Quick, charity organization. They speed run. They raise money. They raised $2.2 million this year, which is almost double what it did last year, which is awesome. They hit the $1 million mark, and then about 12 hours later is when they hit the $2 million mark, and they ended up right around 2.2 million. So that's really cool.
Yeah, that's always a really awesome event.
Stuff is fun to watch.
Yeah, I tuned in for a few random games. I saw a little bit of a Shovel Knight. I saw a little bit of Batman Forever, an old Genesis game.
Yep.
That was really hilarious. I watched a little bit of last year's Doom, where they exploited a really hilarious glitch that basically allowed them to nuke bosses in like 3 seconds. But that was pretty entertaining.
Their videos also make great guides because they're so short. I mean, sometimes they don't make great guides because they're glitching the games and breaking the games, but sometimes they do because it's like they can show you the quickest path to get from where you're at to where you want to go.
Yeah, and so one of the other things that's really cool, if anyone missed this year's AGDQ, it looks like that they are updating, or they've been updating their YouTube channel in a way that I don't think that they did last year, where they've got it split off into games. So it actually is really easy to find a particular game if you miss one of those, and you could. It's one of those things where if I'm making dinner, I'll just put it on in the background for background noise, and it's pretty awesome. So check that out if you've never watched any of those. The next bit here is Scalebound has been canceled. Rest in peace, Microsoft's 2014 E3 lineup. I'm pretty sure everything's either been canceled or not coming out.
I was pretty disappointed about that because that game looked really interesting, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like games get canceled all the time, and a lot of times they can be disappointing, but like this one, other than like a game that looked potentially interesting, like being canceled, it also like you said, this is Microsoft, like this was one of the few like Microsoft exclusives they had for over the past few years, and like they announced this thing at E3 2014. Which E3 2014 was the first E3 after they had wheeled back all of their controversial Xbox One stuff, and E3 2014 was when they were beating the drum of like, okay, like we've wheeled back all of these policies, now we're all about the games. Here's a bunch of like exclusives we've worked out and we have coming, and like these are the reasons you want to buy an Xbox One, and like this was one of their big tentpole games was Scalebound, which is made by Platinum, who makes Bayonetta and a bunch of other things that people really like. And it was going to be exclusive, and yeah, it gets canceled like over 2 years later. And this is already after that Phantom Dust game got canceled, which people were also really excited about from that press conference. And Recore actually made it out, came out last year, to not great reception. So it's basically like, and the only surviving one left is Crackdown 3, which who knows if that will actually come out and be good or be canceled, or who knows what. That one's still to be determined. But it's just like basically all of the good exclusives that are not called Halo or Forza that Microsoft has, or Gears, have like they're just like not worth anything anymore. So it's like if that company, which was like that company was already basically a Halo and Gears and Forza factory, and like now they're even more so. So it's just kind of like really narrowing the scope of like what Microsoft offers on their like as exclusives.
Yeah, I mean, and then there were also some reports kind of rolling around that the game was like 80% content complete. So having very big exclusives like that are killed off that late in the development cycle is newsworthy in and of itself. So yeah, but this was a game that you were looking forward to, Will?
Yeah, there were rumors that it was going to be a like a co-op online thing, and also I love the parts of Skyrim where you got to control Odahviing, the dragon. You got to bring him down and to call him in as a helper. And this one has you. It was rumored that you could kind of control dragons and like have them help you out in combat, which sounds fantastic, does it not?
Absolutely.
So I was a little upset about it, but it is what it is.
Yeah, it's just kind of another cut, like, in just, like, the nonstop stream. It just, like, keeps drilling home the fact that, like, unless you really love Halo, Forza, or Gears, then, like, it's just hard to buy into the Microsoft bandwagon at this point. Fortunately, now with the PC crossover thing, like, you kind of don't have to think about it, but, like, still.
Yeah.
So the big news is Nintendo had their Nintendo Switch event. I'm just going to read off a couple of bullet points so we can go back and talk about this one point at a time. I just saw right before we started recording that they're going to kill off the Miiverse with the launch of the Switch. That was something that I don't think was in their original announcement video, but yeah, no more Miiverse. They're sort of duplicating what Sony and Microsoft have done for the online with having a premium online service. I don't think that that's going to cost money until the fall. But the gist of it is that you pay money, and it's a little like PS Plus, except worse in every way, where you can play VC games for a month, and then those games go back. Price $300. 32 gigs onboard memory, but it does have SD card support, which is great because 32 gigs is not a lot today in the life of games.
No, it's not.
When it is undocked, you see anywhere between 2.5 to 6 hour battery life, and I'm sure that varies wildly depending on whether you're playing a graphically intensive game or not.
Yeah.
They're shooting for 1080p, 60 frames per second when docked on your TV, and then when it's undocked, it's 720p, 30 frames per second on the tablet. Launching with Breath of the Wild with Mario Odyssey coming up this holiday season, which is like a year from now. So that's kind of far, and other than that, there's really not a whole much of a launch lineup. So it's a little bit difficult, I think, to justify getting one of these on release unless you know that you're going to buy into that ecosystem for the lifespan of the console.
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, I think, is for each person on the panel. You see yourself getting one at launch or at all?
I mean, so the thing is that I was sort of on the fence with the Switch before they really announced anything, right? Because to me, Nintendo needed to show me something more than what they showed me with the Wii U. Full disclaimer: I did not purchase a Wii U. That was not very high on my list of things to spend time on. So I was intrigued,
Paul,
now
Paul, you missed out on Funky Barn.
I'm sure I missed out on a lot of things that I'm totally okay with missing out on.
Tokyo Mirage Sessions.
Yeah, well, every system has like a game or two. But yeah, So I was on the fence. I was hoping that they would show me something. I was definitely intrigued by there being a unified platform for all of their development teams because the 3DS as a console is pretty cool. But they didn't really show me anything here, and the flip side of it is like, all right, well, you want to charge for online, but you've never really done online in a way that I've found very compelling. So show me more of the details. Like I'm still cool with buying into the philosophy of like what they're doing, but they didn't really show me anything to make me want to get one on launch, and I'll probably reevaluate sometime around the end of the year after some stuff has come out and maybe some Black Friday sales are going on or some pack-ins. But I would say that I left this entire press conference, if I was at a solid 5, whether or not to buy it, I'm still at a 5, maybe down to a 4.5, just because I was expecting a little more, but I haven't sworn it off, and I'm definitely not going to pick up one on launch.
Do we have the actual launch lineup?
Yes.
What are the launch titles?
The launch lineup
Breath of the Wild,
Breath of the
Skyrim.
Wild, Skylanders Imaginators, Super Bomberman R, 1-2 Switch, and Just Dance 2017. So Just Dance and Skylanders both came out last year. Super Bomberman R, from what I've heard, is a bad version of Bomberman. 1-2 Switch is a cow milking simulator, and Zelda Breath of the Wild is also coming out on Wii U.
Right. So, I'm happy to
But
share
not
my
great.
own perspective. How about you, Flex? Though you tend to be a little bit more of a bull or an optimist when it comes to Nintendo. How did you feel like this shaped up?
I don't know if optimist would be the word. Maybe more willing to put up with their bullshit than most people is the more accurate way to put it. So the thing for me when it comes to buying Nintendo hardware is I always know in the long run, for my taste, they will always have enough games that I want. And I think that will hold true with the Switch because they are combined, in theory, I mean, all signs point to this, they are combining their handheld and console efforts. Like they already mentioned, like Shin Megami Tensei and Fire Emblem stuff and whatever else down the road, which like normally has been relegated to handhelds. And of course there will be Pokemon and all that stuff. So I'm still, and their handhelds have been like for all the problems with the Wii U and the Wii, and you know, for some people the GameCube, like their handhelds, DS, 3DS, Game Boy Advance, like those things have all killed it. So operating under the assumption that, you know, at least some percentage of that handheld stuff will continue to exist on this platform, like I feel like there is still a good chance that this thing will be worth owning. And then the other caveat is that Nintendo is always so stodgy on price. So the thing for me that usually leads to me being an early adopter on their systems is I know they're never going to have good sales on their systems. So my thought process is always, well, it's never going to go down in price. So economically, it doesn't matter if I get it now or in 2 years because it's still going to be $300. And I know there are going to be games I'm going to want to play at some point. So I usually just go ahead and get it. So I will probably get this system pretty early. And I give all of those caveats because I do not condone it in any way. I don't think it's really a good purchase to get it early, but because I'm a weirdo, I will.
I mean, that argument is very true, though. Like with the Wii U, I think I bought it, 4 years into its life cycle, and I got $50 off in 2 games.
Right.
Like, that's nothing compared to...
Yeah, so, yeah, it ends up in a roundabout way making there really be no incentive for waiting on getting a Nintendo system. Like there's no benefit to getting it later. The only reason to hold off would be is if you're not convinced you're going to want one at all, which is a very real concern.
I mean,
with the games I know I like from Nintendo, like I'm pretty sure that it will eventually get there. So for me, there's not really a reason to wait.
Yeah, but I mean, just a counterpoint to the price going down. That's assuming that you're not going to go out into the used market. Like
true, which I'm not. I wouldn't buy a used system.
Well,
that's just me.
And
personally.
the used market for Nintendo also holds its value fairly well too.
Yeah, that's true.
The games do, but I feel like that the systems have dropped over the lifespan of the system. But that's also assuming that you want to get there, to get your system from a GameStop or something like that used, which I don't know that I would either. But
I tend to avoid used systems. But that's just a personal thing. I mean, otherwise, I did come out of this presentation like less high on the system than I was going in. And I think pretty much all of those bullet points you read, like I have concerns about, except maybe the price. I think the price is mostly okay.
Yeah, I think the price is fine. Yeah. I mean, how much does the 3DS cost right now? Like $230 if you can find one, because they're apparently out of stock everywhere.
Yeah, so that's another weird thing is the 3DS apparently you can't find one anywhere anymore, which is ridiculous. But anyway, yeah, I think the 3DS is around $180, $200. Yeah.
I just did a quick check on Amazon, and it looks like it's about $200, but none of them are new. They're all used, even on Amazon, which I was not expecting to see that.
Yeah, like you literally cannot find a 3DS anywhere right now. It's bizarre.
So Will, how about you? I want to share a few points on my own, but I don't want to step in front of our biggest Nintendo fan on the panel.
Well, I will say that I don't know what I will say actually. I think the idea of there have been some interesting turn-based strategy titles that I think might be kind of fun to play, like things like your Advance Wars or maybe your Fire Emblem type games that have actually been more interesting to me than a lot of the main games that come out on the Nintendo console. And so the idea of maybe being able to play those on a console seems kind of neat. I've also thought a little bit about how, and I was talking to Flex about this earlier, about bringing the little the screen, the little, I guess,
tablet,
Wii U tablet thing into work and like maybe playing during my lunch break or something. Because I mean, even though the battery life is short, it's more than an hour. So I
And you could plug into a USB charger or whatever.
Yeah, so or maybe
charger.
doing that type of thing. But I guess it all kind of depends. I mean, none of those initial games does anything for me really. So it would just be it would be after some real good games came out, and a lot of times I can get it. I can get it done on the PC, whatever it is I'm trying to do. So it just depends. I'm curious to see how this online works though, because they have had a very interesting online presence in terms of the online co-op and online multiplayer. And I know that I think Splatoon I think was like an online hit, right? So I mean they're getting closer, But yeah, that's all the thoughts I have on this guy so far.
Yeah, I guess I can echo a lot of the sentiment on the panel in that, Nintendo somehow managed to put out as many questions as answers in their press conference. And for my taste, I don't know, I'm kind of on the fence because, like you said, the price isn't bad, and based on the Wii and maybe even the DS, they don't tend to price drop very often. But at the same time, the initial offering isn't, especially knowing the actual launch lineup, and I do want to give it its props. Some of the gameplay footage they showed for Mario Odyssey and Breath of the Wild, which is also a Wii U title, and they showed some previews for RPGs, and Square is doing this new RPG that looked kind of interesting. That'll be Switch exclusive, so I could definitely see getting the system at some point. But there are also questions about how's the paid online going to look? What about local multiplayer? How exactly are they going to, are they going to continue using the touchscreen, or are they going to try to make it a more console-focused experience? It's tough to say what. Yeah, and plus the hardware is just a little bit underwhelming because 2 to 6 hour battery life, 720p in tablet mode,
Well, the 720p in tablet mode, I think will be okay because it's only a 6.5-inch screen. That being said, I don't think that the internals of that thing is going to lend it towards a whole lot of third-party development. And I mean that's also one of those things where it's, hey, the Nintendo home consoles have not been a direct competitor to the Xbox One or the PS4 for a while now, right? But this particular piece of hardware, I think, is going to be pretty difficult to get people to commit to doing a whole lot of development for something that they really couldn't port around to the other systems.
Yeah, I feel like this is going to just continue the Nintendo story of no third-party support.
And it's interesting too because the hardware, it just seems underwhelming to me because before its launch, a lot of people likened it potentially to the NVIDIA Shield, which is a tablet I actually just ordered for myself because I want a kind of a well-rounded Android tablet for productivity, but also, for its hardware, the Shield is actually it's $200 tablet with a 1920 by 1200 screen. And I've heard that it's got pretty respectable hardware for that $200 price point. So, for Nintendo to come, people are saying it's not a direct competitor, but, I just bought a Shield. I don't know if I really want to go pay $300 for a Switch that's going to run it through at 720 FPS. Why would I buy a Switch over any tablet?
Yeah.
It's a curious balance. I can definitely see it because Nintendo does have good first party software.
Yeah, I think
that did show off some cool things, but I'm a little underwhelmed.
Yeah, I think
considering where the tablet market is now, where they're coming in swinging.
Yeah, I think as always this is going to be, or at least all signs point to it, is being predominantly you get it to play Nintendo first party games. I don't think it's even as powerful as an Xbox One or PS4, so I don't see a lot of easy ports. And Nintendo's not exactly known for establishing great relationships and getting third-party exclusives, so I don't see a ton of that. I could see potentially a lot of indie games getting on it, games that don't need a lot of power. But
yes.
But I I mean, that's not going to sell a lot of people on the system because those games are everywhere. But yeah, it's a weird. It's almost like they're trying to put every single like controller method possible into this one system because like you have a tablet with a touchscreen, you have the Joy-Cons which basically act like Wii remotes in a way. You can dock the thing and play with like a traditional controller with the Pro controller. Like it's almost like they put every single controller functionality.
Amiibo support.
Yeah, it still has amiibos. So like they've basically put every single controller functionality that's been in a console or a handheld in the past decade or more, like all in this one thing, which is a little it's a little weird. It's actually kind of like they focus more on motion controls in that presentation than I expected them to do, and like it was kind of a weird bummer in a way of like, really, does anyone care to do like this, like these Wiimote style mini games in 2017? Like who really cares anymore?
Neat that you put it in, and maybe you can use that. But like what I really want to see as a more meat and potatoes is like, are you going to make good use of the touchscreen? Are you going to continue doing the two-screen stuff? Which I get the impression they're not.
Yeah, that's actually a slight confusion point for me. I actually don't think that's possible because if you're playing on a TV, I believe the tablet has to be docked, and that it's not showing anything on the screen when it's docked. So I don't think you can actually have both the tablet and a TV on at once. So I don't think it does have dual screen functionality.
Which that actually would be maybe not a huge loss, but if you think of the 3DS in particular, and to a much lesser extent the Wii U, that's actually a nice little feature.
Well, the thing is that they're also adding DS titles into the Virtual Console library, and I think GameCube as well are the two ones that they're going to add in. Well, you can't play a DS game while the tablet's docked, especially one that requires touchscreen control. So the fact that you're going to have games that have to be played in one mode or the other is a little disappointing for me. I mean, I don't have a great solution. I mean, I'm not a console designer, but it's one of those things that I don't want to have 3DS games and then Switch games to the point to where it's like, okay, if I want to play what would have been a handheld game, I can't play it on the monitor or on my TV because I've got to undock it and use the touchscreen because I can't do that whenever I'm sitting on my couch. That's what I fear. And if that's what ends up happening to where it's almost treated like two different consoles by developers, I think that would be a real shame, and that would definitely be a knock against me ever picking one of those up.
Yeah, the touchscreen is, I think, the trickiest part because, as far as I know, you cannot use the touchscreen if you're playing on a TV. So anything that wants to use the touchscreen could only be played in handheld mode, I would imagine, which the biggest casualty of that is by far Mario Maker. Like, I would assume they would want to continue the Mario Maker franchise on the Switch, and unless they come up with a controller input solution for that game, like, I think that game's always going to be best with touch controls and on the tablet, and that would mean, as far as I know, you could only play it undocked, which is probably not going to be. Which I don't know. I guess when I was making levels on the Wii U, like I was always looking at the tablet anyway, so maybe it's not really that much different than playing it on the Wii U, but still, it's like it does make it a little more limiting. It feels like Nintendo's had so many different controller methods, and they're like still trying to drag them all along. You wonder at some point if they just need to drop some of this stuff and be like, no, we need to just stop having a million ways to play video games.
Yeah, I don't know, and it would also be different if there was a ton of third-party development, or there was just like a whole lot of developer activity on this console. But there's only so many games that Nintendo can put out as a first party, so why do we need 17 different input methods? Just if you want to make it accessible for developers to have a wide array of input options, that makes perfect sense if you have developers, but they don't have a ton. Let me rephrase. There are a ton of developers that have announced that they will be developing software for the
Right.
Switch. But that's the same announcement that came out for the last 3 Nintendo consoles.
They do that every console.
Misleading.
That doesn't mean anything. Like, they're doing a port of Skyrim, a almost 6-year-old game, and like that could be the only thing Bethesda ever does for the Switch, and that gets their name on that giant thing of developers. So like, that's a very loose commitment.
Yeah. So, and I don't know. We'll just wait and see. But I'm a little sour, and just real quick, I wanted to plug the reaction of the internet as a whole. Boy, the internet hated this thing. I mean, yes, the internet is not one big monolithic thing. Everyone has different opinions, but the immediate reaction to this thing on Reddit and on Twitter and in a few other spaces was, "Oh God, no!" So just FYI.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, to be fair, it's not all bad.
No, it's not.
It's just thoroughly underwhelming.
Yeah,
Like,
the main thing I'm excited for still stands, which is very much the unification in theory. Hopefully this pans out, but all signs point to it being a unification of console and handheld, which, if I pay my $300, get all of Nintendo's software that traditionally has been split between a $300+ console and a $200 handheld onto a single $300 machine. For me, as someone who likes Nintendo games and is probably going to would buy at least one of those machines anyway, like that's kind of a win right there. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous that we had gotten to that point that it was at anyway, so in a way it's just course correction, but it's still better than it was. And there are other little neat things going on. And like Nintendo, I mean, their two first-party games, their big two first-party games are scheduled for this year, Breath of the Wild and Mario Odyssey. Like those both are looking pretty good from what we've seen.
They both look
You
really
want
cool.
You want to take a bet that Mario Odyssey is actually going to release this upcoming holiday? I bet it.
I do not want to put any money on that.
I bet it slips to 2018. I'm not saying that it's going to slip like a whole year, but I wouldn't be surprised to see a slip, from holiday to February or January.
I wouldn't be surprised to see it slip, but if I had to make a guess, I would actually say they do hit their date because the Mario team has not put out anything in almost 4 years, and Nintendo's usually pretty good at hitting their holiday release dates for every franchise except Zelda. So they're always pretty good at making sure they have a big holiday game, and their Wii U output for the past year and a half has been poor, so like their teams have got to been working on something. So I wouldn't be surprised if that game's mostly done. I mean, I also wouldn't be surprised if it slipped, but I think they might be able to stick this one. I almost wouldn't be surprised if they were actually targeting a release date closer to launch initially and pushed it back to the fall.
Right.
Internally.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, I think flex your logic about they're most likely going to have a library worth playing, especially if it's unified. Yeah, in the long run. And I mean, I can't imagine a best case scenario where having the portability, it's basically like having a built-in Super Game Boy, and they do some cool things with the touchscreen or the controllers. And they fix their online.
Well,
can't imagine that best case scenario. So
Yeah, I like the idea of being able to play on TV or on the go. I mean, I imagine I'll do most of my play on the TV when possible, but there's, like you said, there's no downside to having that option.
Yeah, and I did just find a quote, which I don't believe it, but Reggie, who works for Nintendo, he came out and he said that the Reginator has actually said that they're going to have the 3DS and the Switch live side by side, and the 3DS has a long life in front of it. I think that's marketing BS, but at the same time, if that's not marketing BS and they really are going to do that, Nintendo? Stop.
If you're supporting them side by side, Reggie, where can I buy a 3DS?
That's a very good point.
Now that would be a good counter case for not buying a Switch if they did do that.
That's all marketing BS. Like, I mean, Sony said that they supported the PS3 alongside the PS4. Games kept coming out. Games probably still come out for the PS3. Like, it's one of those things where like there's always some overlap in when a new console comes out of like. games that'll
Right,
straddle
of course.
both or whatever
Of
else. So that's just their way of saying, like, yes, there will still be some software coming out for the 3DS after March 3rd this year. I think Nintendo's first-party efforts will be 100% on the Switch. I can't imagine they'll, unless there was something that was already well in the works for the 3DS. I can't imagine there being a long overlap. And they've
of
had
course.
that overlap with their consoles. Like Pokemon Black and White 2 came out on the original DS after the 3DS came out, but it was like within a year afterwards. So it was just one of those things where like they were probably already working on that game. So like I imagine there will be some overlap, but I imagine that's mostly marketing BS.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I do too. It's just kind of funny that we're talking about it like it's a successor, and then Reggie comes down and he's like, "Nah, guys, go buy 3DSs.
Yeah,
We're still gonna love you."
It's hilarious because all of like saying that is just to not prevent people from buying 3DSs, but then they're preventing people from buying 3DSs anyway because they're not making them anymore apparently because you can't find them anywhere, which is ridiculous. Yeah, there. I mean, there's a lot to comment on pretty much all these bullet points, but I think the most ridiculous one has to be the idea of paying for online services from Nintendo. Because, like, with how shoddy their online has been historically, like, the idea of paying for that, not to mention, like, how many Nintendo games do you want to play online to begin with? Like...
One, I want to play Splatoon. That's it.
Right.
Nothing else.
And how long... Yeah, it's like... The idea of paying money to play that online is just insane. It's like, I mean, maybe their online stuff will actually work. Maybe they will actually make more multiplayer games. But then even on top of that, their free virtual console game, I think it's just one game per month. And you have access to that one game for that 1 month, and then it doesn't even stay in your library while you're a subscriber. It just goes away. It's like, what is that
That's
about?
why I say it's like PS Plus, but worse in every
you get
single
one game
way.
instead of 6, and you don't keep that game.
I mean, with like with PS Plus, if you own a PS3, a PS4, and a Vita, holy bananas, that's a lot of games.
One could argue that the virtual console games you'll get through here are probably better than most of the PS Plus games you get, because those games have not been amazing for a while. But
that's true.
But still, it's like, I mean, these virtual console games are also probably going to be, because I think they said only NES and Super Nintendo games are going to be in this online program. So these are all really old games.
Right, and I mean, you can play NES games literally in your web browser.
Yeah.
You don't have to download anything. And so to me, if you're the best that your virtual console can offer is the same stuff that you've been able to emulate for 15 years now. I mean, sorry, but you got to do a little bit better than that, Nintendo.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And then on top of all that, apparently how voice chatting and party management will work is through a phone app.
Yeah, that's never happening.
It's not even built into the system. You have to download a Nintendo-made phone app to do your party management. This is insane. Like, who would think of something like that in 2017? That doesn't make any sense.
And it also doesn't make sense from the standpoint to where it's like, all right, go and turn on an Xbox. Go and turn on listen, someone that works at Nintendo has to own a PC. Go turn on Steam. It's like people have done a lot of work. Like other companies have done a ton of work in online management for all of their services and things like that. It's not like it's like a secret formula. Yeah. It may be difficult to implement. I'm not saying that you can just flip a switch and then all of a sudden you have your pre-built online service. But the point is, Steam has done a very good job of figuring out how to make their online stuff work. PlayStation's done a very good job. And it's just like, go look at that and just do that.
Yeah,
if
and
you
these
just
companies
do that,
have been doing this for a decade at this point.
Right, and the fact that Nintendo still hasn't gotten there is just bewildering to me because I know that I'm not smarter than them.
Yeah.
So what is the reason for not?
It's like it's hard to imagine that they just don't know that these other companies are doing it well. Like it's like part of me wants to sit here and say, oh, they're just not paying attention, but that's ridiculous. Like they're a huge company, and I'm sure people scream this stuff at them all the time.
All the time.
Which, to be fair, like PSN wasn't that great until it became paid. Is that right?
Well, it's been paid though for like how many years now?
After
over
after it
3
became
years.
paid, they started kind of enhancing it. I
Yeah.
think Microsoft was a little more on the ball.
Yeah,
Yes.
and that
Microsoft has been
justified
doing it
it.
well since at least the start of the 360.
Yeah, maybe
Right.
even before theirs was paid. So maybe there's a case to be made that if Nintendo offers a paid online, they can actually
But yes,
develop it. But you're right.
yeah, I
like,
agree
it's
with
such
that. But
garbage
then
now that
they have
it's
to
like-
convince enough people to pay for
Yeah.
the online to get enough income. And how many of their games are actually going to make good use of online?
Absolutely.
I think
Yeah.
that's we don't know how much their online's going to cost, so that's going to be a huge factor here as well.
It was
Especially since,
$15
like you
a month.
said, they're not really
was-
kind of giving incentives as freely as the other companies. Like they're just loaning you a VC game,
Yeah.
a random VC game every month or something like that.
I think I saw that Switch was $15 per month. Flex.
That can't be right. That is insane.
That's ridiculous.
I'm gonna Google it real quick while you guys are talking.
I mean, we
everything
don't
I
have
heard
the
was that they
information
hadn't
now. Let's
released a price
let's not
yet.
dive into speculation
Yeah.
on that, on the pricing structure. That's more of a wait and see thing, I think.
Yeah. I mean, if
I
they've
think the general
officially said-
reaction is that 15 would be way too high.
Yeah,
if
I mean,
that's true.
like PS Plus is what, 50 a year, which is less than $5 a month. That's. But anyway, yeah, we'll see what comes of that. But I have a hard time imagining that going well unless they make some amazing online games. To switch it around a little bit, there are a few things that I did. Oh, I guess the other online related thing is the Miiverse going away is kind of a sad little thing. Like, I don't think anyone really cares, but the Miiverse was also kind of amusing. Just like their own weird Nintendo-centric like message boards, basically, where people drew stuff and just posted it.
It's a bit odd because, like, Microsoft has their avatars, so I don't know if Miiverse is like.
Well, I don't know if Mii's are getting killed off. The Miiverse is just like basically their own message board
Like a little
stuff.
social app or something like that.
Yeah. So that's kind of a bummer, but they are bringing back, or I guess removing again region locking. So software will be region free again, which is good. The idea of HD Rumble is hilarious and also apparently works pretty well. I don't know exactly how games are going to use it. Like, one of the tech demos they did was apparently like you moving the controller around, and it was supposed to be like you're holding a box, and like the rumble was supposed to simulate like how many metal balls were rolling around in the box, and apparently the rumble is good enough that you can like figure that out just by the rumble. So I don't know, better controller rumbles. Supporting SD cards is, I think, a good way to go for their memory because games are big now, and SD cards are a non-proprietary, cheap way to expand memory. Like, you can get those things for dirt cheap.
Right.
So, like, I think that's a good move to stick with that route. So, I mean, like, there are some little positives that came in here, but yeah, there's still a lot of sticky stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, and I think at this point we've probably talked through about as much as we really can about it. I did just do some googling. Apparently, that $15 per month thing was debunked. So never mind that.
Yeah, as
I
far
never
as
said
I
that.
know, they haven't officially announced anything there.
Right. Yeah, I just found something that where Nintendo said that they will have more details as like they get to the fall, basically.
Yeah. One last point I want to make is, while the system itself is priced reasonably, I think the extra controllers are way overpriced.
Yeah, I wasn't going to bring that up because I felt like I was hating on Nintendo a little too hard, but whoo.
Hey man, they're asking for it. The Pro controller is $70, and like a PS4 and Xbox One controllers are, I don't know, 50 or 60. They're not 70, and I can't imagine that thing being better than those controllers. So, like, that's already a lot. And then a new set of Joy-Cons is $80. That's just a lot of money.
Yeah, that gets back to the, I do think the price doesn't look that bad, but again, I was questioning the the value of the hardware compared to like the NVIDIA Shield tablet. Like I'm not even sure if this thing is as powerful as that, and that's a $200 Android tablet.
Yeah.
I mean, you can play a lot of games on Android too.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, I played Hitman Go recently. It's a winner.
What?
Well, you have returned.
I saw an opening and I took it, man.
Well, that's good.
Maybe that's a good segue into the
What are we playing
the
next?
final
Yeah.
countdown.
I think we probably hashed around the Switch as much as we're going to today, but I expect that we will be talking more about that whenever it gets closer to release and whenever some of these details get filled in. It's kind of odd how little that we feel like that we really know about the system when it's going to release in 2 months.
Yeah, less than 2 months. It's actually surprising like how soon that thing's coming out.
Yeah,
it's like 6 weeks.
Right. So, yeah, I guess all that stuff will get figured out in 6 weeks, which means that we might have to do an ATACS special edition Nintendo Switch launch. But yeah, so moving right along out of the news, we're gonna add a little segment here of what we're planning on playing next. What's next on the agenda? What's next on the backlog? Someone was nice and wrote Dark Souls 3 down in our little shared document here. I don't know if Dark Souls 3 is going to be the next thing I play, but it is rising on my backlog list. Now that I'm done with Witcher, I only have about maybe 15 or 20 hours left in Trails of Cold Steel. That's what I'm really going to try and wrap up next. So hopefully by the next time that we do ATACS, I can talk about a big ass JRPG. Flex, what do you have on your games radar?
Now that I've wrapped up most of what I want to do with Hitman, I'll keep going with Final Fantasy 15. Those were kind of my two outstanding games from last year that I didn't get to. So Final Fantasy 15 will definitely be kind of the primary thing taking up time. The other game that for whatever reason I ended up picking it up in the Steam sale, and I think I'll probably jump into it soon. I want to play that Valhalla Cyberpunk Bartender Action. Something about that game looks entertaining.
Okay. I look forward to hearing about that at the next podcast. Will, what you got going on?
Well, I did kind of add it into the mix there. The Deus Ex Mankind Divided, I think, is going to be the next big guy that I tackle. I do
on my backlog that is
really
itching to play.
I do like stealth. I like a lot of the themes that those games seem to play with. And so hopefully I'll like it. I enjoyed the last one with the exception of the boss fights, which nobody liked. And there you go.
All right. And Mr. Ryan, what do you have on there?
Yeah, I guess aside from continuing the games I talked about, one thing I'd like to do in 2017 is to possibly catch up on my backlog a bit. Maybe not worry about new games for a couple months. I've started poking around with Alpha Protocol, a game that's been on my backlog for a very long time.
Lord.
Yep.
See how that goes, but
blast from the past.
I have quite a bit.
It's got a following. That game's got a following.
Yeah.
I
was just gonna say, that's actually a big goal for me too, is tackle backlog stuff this year.
I could also see, since I have a Wii U and I haven't played a ton of games on it, I could see going through the catalog and trying to find a couple of good Wii U games. So I'd like to focus on some older games, starting with possibly with Alpha Protocol at the top of my backlog.
Nice.
Yeah, sounds like a plan to me.
2 seconds before we sign off, we forgot the most important thing from that Switch presentation.
Oh, what's that?
Mario's running around a city called New Donk City. How's that for a city name?
I saw Mario 2 references in the trailer, so I'm not going to comment.
Super Mario Odyssey in New Donk City. We're not in the Mushroom Kingdom anymore, folks.
All right, and on that note, we are going to go ahead and wrap up this podcast. We will be back in about 2 weeks, and at some point we need to get on to figure out when we're going to have our ranking of Final Fantasies. We were going to put that off until people had a chance to dig into 15 a little bit. Now it sounds like that's happening. So stay tuned to your podcast feed. You might see a special edition Final Fantasy ranking podcast come up, which with that many games to rank could take some time. Anyway, I am Paul from Atlanta. I have been your host, and joining us again were Mr. Flex from Raleigh, Will from Greenville, and Ryan from New York City. We're signing off. We will see you in a couple of weeks.